Imagine going through puberty all over again, like the wild hormone swings, the rapidly changing body, those sudden emotional drops. But now imagine going through all of that while holding down a demanding career, trying to raise teenagers and, organizing care for your aging parents. Oh, and according to the medical literature, you might also still have a 10 to 20% chance of getting pregnant.
Right. It is an absolute biological tempest. I mean, we tend to think of puberty as this chaotic, unique transition, but perimenopause is arguably much more complex, and it arrives at literally the absolute busiest, most high-stakes time of a woman's life.
Welcome to the deep dive. We are exploring a really profound and honestly kind of whispered about topic today. We're looking at how couples can manage the loss of intimacy and that creeping emotional distance that so often happens during the menopause transition.
Yeah, it's a huge topic.
It really is. And we are pulling from a massive stack of sources for you today to figure this out. We've got clinical guidelines from the British Menopause Society, psychological toolkits from Relate, peer-reviewed medical literature on sexual function, and just some really straightforward advice from practicing OBGYNs and therapists.
And looking at all this material, it really requires a shift in how we think. Menopause is usually framed as this solo routine.
Oh, for sure. Like a totally individual physical event.
Exactly. Just a woman privately dealing with hot flashes or managing the end of her menstrual cycles. But our sources make it so clear that it is actually a massive relational event. It reshapes the dynamic between partners entirely.
So what does this all mean for you and your relationship? Let's find out. The sources use this striking phrase calling perimenopause puberty in reverse, which I just thought was brilliant.
It's so accurate.
Right, because when you go through puberty, you generally have very few responsibilities. You're a kid. But menopause hits women when they are squarely in what sociologists call the sandwich generation.
Sandwiched between the kids and the parents.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
They are sandwiched between the needs of their growing children and the failing health of their parents. There is just this crushing amount of pressure and basically zero room for error.
And that context, I mean, that is the foundation of everything we are discussing today. You have maximum external stress colliding with maximum internal chaos. Because during perimenopause, the ovaries don't just, gently power down over a few years.
They don't just weigh out nicely.
Not at all. They work erratically. The body is still periodically trying to support a possible pregnancy, which causes massive, totally unpredictable spikes and then sudden crashes in estrogen levels.
And those crashes do something very specific to the body, right? Because the sources spend a lot of time on something called GSM.
Yes, genitourinary syndrome of menopause.
Yeah.
This affects anywhere from 50 to 70% of women, which is huge. Estrogen is essentially the hormone that keeps the tissues of the vagina and the vulva plump, elastic, and lubricated. It promotes blood flow. So when estrogen drops precipitously, the actual architecture of those tissues literally changes. The cellular walls become thinner, they lose their natural elasticity, and that baseline moisture just vanishes.
Wow. But I noticed in the medical literature it mentions it isn't just estrogen doing a disappearing act here. There are other hormones involved in this drop.
There are. We see a significant drop in free testosterone, as well as something called DHEAS.
Wait, what exactly is DHES?
So think of DHEAS, dihydroepiandrosterone sulfate, if we want to get technical, as a crucial raw material. It's a precursor hormone produced by the adrenal glands. Your body basically acts on it to manufacture both testosterone and estrogen.
Oh, I see. So it's like this supply chain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When the raw materials dry up, the finished products dry up. And because of these combined hormonal shifts, clinical sexual function scores just plummet in early postmenopause. This directly dampens desire, slows arousal, and makes it physically much more difficult to reach orgasm.
I have to push back a little here, or at least ask for some clarification based on those clinical guidelines. Is the loss of intimacy a direct mechanical result of these missing hormones just sort of turning off the desire switch in the brain? Or is it the physical pain from the changing tissues that actually creates the distance?
That is the big question.
Yeah.
And the guidelines point heavily to the pain cycle as the primary driver of the distance.
Oh, really? Not just a lack of interest.
Right. When estrogen drops and those tissues thin out, the friction of intercourse can literally hurt. The medical term for this is dyspareunia. And human beings, we are hardwired to avoid pain.
Obviously.
So when sex becomes painful, the nervous system learns to anticipate that pain the very next time intimacy is initiated.
I actually have an analogy for this. Reading the sources, it felt to me like it's like trying to safely land a plane while the instrument panel is flashing all these erratic signals, and the co-pilot has absolutely no idea what's happening.
That is exactly what it's like.
Yes.
Because the brain starts associating a partner's touch with incoming discomfort. It's bracing for impact.
Right.
And that anticipation triggers a condition called vaginismus. These are involuntary muscle contractions in the pelvic floor. It is the body's unconscious protective mechanism, just clamping down to guard against expected trauma.
Oh, wow. So the body is fighting itself.
It creates a deeply frustrating loop where intimacy feels like an agonizing chore rather than a joy. The body tenses up to protect itself, that tension increases the friction and discomfort, and the experience becomes something the brain decides it absolutely must avoid at all costs.
And that physical avoidance is exactly where the ripple effect starts hitting the relationship itself. The narrative in our sources shifts from the biological symptoms to how this just infiltrates the emotional connection between two people. There is a staggering statistic from the British Menopause Society's surveys.
The one about 50%.
Yes, 50% of women say their sex life is negatively affected during this time, and a full 10% stop having sex altogether, which is a huge portion of the population.
It is. And the psychological fallout from that avoidance is really heavy on both sides of the bed. For the woman, there is often a profound identity shift. The psychological toolkits from Relady mention the phrase, "Who am I now?" coming up repeatedly in therapy.
I can imagine.
Because alongside the shifting moods, there are metabolic changes. Women frequently experience sudden weight gain around the midsection, often referred to as the spare tire, because the drop in estrogen actually changes how the body distributes fat and processes insulin.
Right, it's not just eating habits.
No, not at all. That weight often won't budge even with strict diet and exercise. So women report feeling like strangers in their own skin.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. If a partner doesn't understand the underlying biology, if they don't know about the tissue thinning or the insulin changes, they just see the physical withdrawal, they are highly likely to misinterpret that as personal rejection.
Oh, absolutely. They take it personally.
Right. So if a partner feels rejected and reacts by backing off or getting defensive, does that just make the woman feel even more isolated?
It creates a massive chasm. The partner's thinking, she isn't attracted to me anymore, she doesn't love me, while she is thinking, I'm exhausted, my body hurts, I don't recognize myself, and you aren't helping.
Which brings up a really critical point highlighted by the OBGYNs in our sources regarding how female libido actually functions.
Yes, the environment.
Exactly. Desire is deeply tethered to emotional safety and the surrounding environment. The sources explicitly note that when partners don't carry their weight with household chores, or when they are unsupportive regarding the heavy stress of, say, aging parents, women feel emotionally disconnected.
And that cognitive overload and lack of emotional safety completely crush desire.
It's the chores libido connection. Like, doing the dishes and handling the mental load of the house is actual foreplay because it removes the stress that's blocking the desire.
It lowers the cortisol.
Yeah.
If I look at the broader science of human sexuality, desire often undergoes a fundamental shift during the menopause transition. It moves from being spontaneous to responsive.
Okay, I want to make sure we get this distinction right for the listener. Spontaneous desire is what we usually see in the movies, right? Like, you look at your partner across a room and suddenly you're just in the mood.
Exactly.
It's like turning on a gas stove. You turn the dial and the flame is instantly there.
That's a perfect analogy. Responsive desire, on the other hand, is much more like a charcoal grill.
Okay, I like that.
You don't just turn a dial. You need to gather the charcoal, set the environment, use lighter fluid, light it, and then give it time to heat up. The desire doesn't just appear on its own out of nowhere. It requires emotional safety, relaxation, and a physical warm-up first.
So the arousal has to be kind of coaxed out?
Yes, in response to a relaxing, connected environment. If the partner is withdrawing because they feel rejected, or if the woman's chore burden is just way too high, you are essentially dumping water on that charcoal. Responsive desire never gets the chance to activate.
So the unmanaged biology and the resulting miscommunication actively drive the couple apart. If that's the case, how do couples physically bridge that gap? Let's look at the solutions in the medical literature, because the experts are very clear. This is not something you just have to suffer through in silence.
Not at all. GSM, that syndrome causing the tissue thinning and dryness, is highly treatable.
Right.
From a systemic medical standpoint, there is MHT or HRT, menopause hormone therapy. That replaces estrogen throughout the entire body, addressing hot flashes, bone density, and vaginal health simultaneously.
But some people can't take that, right?
Correct. If a woman cannot take systemic hormones due to a medical history like breast cancer, or if she simply chooses not to, there is localized vaginal estriol.
How does the localized version differ in how it works?
So localized vaginal estriol comes in the form of a cream, a small tablet, or even a flexible ring placed directly into the vagina. The vaginal tissues have estrogen receptors that absorb this very low-dose hormone locally.
So it doesn't go everywhere else.
Exactly. It plumps the tissue back up, restores elasticity, and brings back natural lubrication without releasing significant amounts of estrogen into the general bloodstream. It fixes the local architecture safely.
That's fascinating. But I noticed the clinical guidelines don't just rely on hormones, though. They mention using lasers to treat this, which I have to say sounds a little like sci-fi to me. How does a laser actually fix thin tissue?
You're referring to treatments like the Mona Lisa Touch. It is a fractional CO2 laser. It sounds intense, I know, but it involves a small probe that delivers tiny, painless pulses of laser energy to the vaginal lining.
What does that do?
It creates microscopic wounds.
Yeah.
And this tricks the body's natural healing response into rushing fresh blood flow, collagen, and elastin to the area to repair the damage.
Oh, like microneedling for your face, but
Exactly like that, but for vaginal tissue. The newly generated tissue is thicker, more elastic, and much healthier.
wow. The sources also mention PRP.
Platelet-rich plasma therapy. In this procedure, a doctor draws a small amount of your own blood, spins it in a centrifuge to isolate the blood platelets, and then injects those platelets back into the vaginal and clitoral tissue.
And platelets heal things?
They're packed with growth factors. They essentially instruct the local cells to regenerate, building new blood vessels and rejuvenating nerve endings to restore sensitivity.
That is incredible. And outside of the doctor's office, the psychological toolkits offer highly practical at-home fixes too. Lubricant is a major one, but the specifics really matter here, according to the sources.
They absolutely do.
The sources recommend using silicone-based lubricants first. Because they don't absorb into the skin like water-based ones do, they last much longer and provide a protective glide for those thin tissues. If silicone doesn't work for you, water-based is the backup. But they issue a really strict warning. Never, ever use scented, flavored, or warming lubricants.
Oh yeah, stay away from those. Because menopausal tissue is thinner and more fragile, those chemical additives will cause severe irritation and burning. The pH balance of that tissue is incredibly sensitive during this transition, so keeping it simple and medical grade is crucial.
The toolkits also prescribe Kegel exercises, but not just a vague, do them when you remember kind of thing. It's a very specific protocol.
Right, structure.
10 repetitions, holding the contraction for 3 to 5 seconds each, and doing that 3 times a day. We usually hear about Kegels for, preventing bladder leaks. But the sources emphasize that flexing these muscles rapidly increases blood flow to the pelvic floor. Pumping fresh, oxygenated blood into the area helps keep the tissues engorged and healthy.
It acts as physical therapy for the pelvic floor, counteracting the atrophy that comes from the drop in estrogen.
Now let's talk about the physical realities of postmenopausal sex. Because if those tissues are losing elasticity and tearing, doesn't that open the door for other issues?
It creates a literal open doorway,
Oh.
which leads us to a major medical blind spot discussed in the literature. Postmenopausal women are surprisingly vulnerable to STIs.
Which is incredibly counterintuitive. I mean, you'd think getting older and exiting your reproductive years means worrying less about sexually transmitted infections.
You would think so.
Yeah.
But the structural changes change the risk profile entirely. Because those vulvar and vaginal tissues are fragile and lack natural lubrication, they develop micro tears very easily during friction.
Micro tears that you can't even see.
You might not even feel them. But those microscopic tears act as direct entry points for viruses and bacteria to enter the bloodstream. So, if a person is re-entering the dating pool or is outside of a tested monogamous relationship, condoms are still absolutely essential to protect that vulnerable tissue.
Here's where it gets really interesting, considering everything we've just discussed about the end of fertility. The guidelines highlight a wild statistic about pregnancy risk. Women in their early 40s who are actively going through perimenopause still have a 10 to 20% chance of getting pregnant.
Yep. Because the ovaries are misfiring, not shutting down completely right away.
Right.
You can still release a viable egg amidst all the chaos.
The medical guidelines are really strict on this. They say contraception is required until a woman under 50 hasn't had a period for 2 full years. 2 years.
It's a long time.
And if she's over 50, she has to wait 1 full year without a single period before safely stopping contraception.
It sounds paradoxical to worry about pregnancy during menopause, but managing these physical realities is paramount. Knowing you aren't going to experience physical pain because you're using the right localized treatments or lubricants, knowing you aren't at risk for an STI, and knowing you aren't risking an unexpected pregnancy in your late 40s, all of this does something vital.
It takes the pressure off.
Exactly. It allows the sympathetic nervous system to stand down. As we discussed with the charcoal grill analogy for responsive desire, a relaxed nervous system is an absolute prerequisite for arousal. You cannot experience pleasure if your brain is subtly scanning the environment for danger, pain, or consequences.
You have to feel safe to feel desire. Which brings us to the final evolution of this transition, redefining what intimacy actually looks like for a couple. Keeping the spark alive doesn't just mean fixing the mechanical act of intercourse.
No, it's much deeper than that. The clinical therapists emphasize a technique called sensate focus for couples who have become trapped in that pain or avoidance cycle we talked about. If sex has become a source of anxiety, sensate focus is a structured program of touching exercises that temporarily removes the pressure of penetrative sex entirely.
Taking it completely off the table.
Yeah, exactly. The couple agrees that intercourse and reaching orgasm are not the goals right now. Instead, they focus purely on the sensation of non-sexual touch.
Like holding hands or massages.
A hand massage, tracing a shoulder, just holding each other without expectations.
Hmm.
By removing the end goal, you deactivate the brain's fight or flight response to anticipated pain. It gradually rebuilds the physical connection and teaches the nervous system that touch is safe again.
That makes so much sense. And the psychological toolkits actually break intimacy down into 4 distinct categories, which really helps reframe the relationship. There is physical intimacy, which includes the sensate focus we just discussed.
Right.
But there's also emotional intimacy, intellectual intimacy, and experiential intimacy. Sharing your fears about aging, debating an interesting book, or trying a completely new hobby together, that is all intimacy.
It expands the menu of connection.
I love that phrase.
When the physical item on the menu is temporarily unavailable or requires a lot of medical adjustment, couples who thrive lean heavily into the emotional, intellectual, and experiential items to maintain their bond.
I look at it kind of like renovating a house. You aren't trying to build the exact same house you lived in during your 20s. That house is gone, the materials have changed. You are building a new room that fits who you both are right now. The foundation of love and history is the same, but the layout has to adapt to your current physiological needs.
That is a highly functional way to look at it. And to help build that new room, the psychological sources heavily emphasize the use of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, as well as mindfulness.
Really? For physical symptoms?
Yes. These techniques are clinically proven to help women reframe the negative, intrusive thoughts that sabotage intimacy.
So how does CBT work in the middle of a menopausal symptom, like, say, a hot flush?
Let's take a hot flush right in the middle of an intimate moment. The immediate, untrained thought might be, my partner is repulsed, I look terrible, I'm sweating uncontrollably, my body is failing.
Which sounds completely overwhelming.
It is. And that thought immediately spikes cortisol, induces panic, and kills any chance of connection. But CBT trains the brain to notice that thought, pause, and actively replace it with, this is just a temporary biological surge. We'll pass in a few minutes. Let's see how I can ride this one out.
Oh, that's so much gentler.
It involves acknowledging that your partner isn't judging you for a biological symptom. By lowering the internal stress and self-criticism, CBT directly enhances emotional availability and sexual satisfaction.
So when we pull all these sources together, what we're really looking at is a profound biological shift. It requires a lot of patience, a healthy amount of silicone-based lubricant, an understanding of the underlying biology, and a total willingness from both partners to redefine what closeness looks like. It isn't a solo journey.
It is a transition, not an ending. And as we look comprehensively at all these clinical and psychological sources, there's an underlying cultural current that makes this transition so much harder than it needs to be. Society suffers from a condition the experts identify as ageist erotophobia.
Ageist erotophobia, that is quite the term.
Yes, it is this pervasive cultural disgust or deep discomfort at the very idea of older bodies being sexual or intimate.
Right, because everything in the media is about youth.
Exactly. Society incessantly tells us that intimacy belongs exclusively to the young, the flawless, the highly estrogen-fueled. It pushes a narrative of decline and obsolescence.
Mm-hmm.
But what if we reject that entirely?
That's a great question.
The sources suggest a really powerful reframe. What if the end of fertility, the cessation of the monthly cycles, and the biological necessity of slowing down actually present an invitation?
An invitation to what?
It could be an invitation to the most authentic, pressure-free, and emotionally profound intimacy of a couple's entire lives. You no longer have to perform to societal standards. You don't have to worry about reproductive timing. You just get to connect with the person in front of you. It shifts the narrative of menopause from a story of tragic loss to a story of liberation.
The story of liberation. I think that is the perfect place to leave it. So for everyone listening, take these insights, this science, and these tools back to your own relationships. When the biology changes the music, you don't have to force yourselves to keep dancing the exact same steps. Stop, listen to the new rhythm together, and figure out a new way to move. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.